U.S. and Japanese officials recently signed a new trade agreement. It calls for Japan to end its quotas on imports of U.S. beef and citrus products. At a recent ceremony, the agreement was signed by Japanese Ambassador Nobuo Matsunaga and U.S. Trade Ambassador Clayton Yiter.
We believe the agreement sets a fine example for the Uruguay round, and we hope also it sets a precedent for further market opening measures by the government of Japan in the future, not only in agriculture but in the industrial sector. I would say it's a great day for American agriculture. It's a great day for Japanese consumers, and I truly believe that in the long run it will also prove to be a sound and beneficial result for Japanese agriculture.
I wish to conclude by once again expressing how pleased I am to see that the beef and citrus issue is now finally behind us, and paying tribute to those negotiators, including hard negotiators on both sides, for their untiring efforts to bring these negotiations to a successful conclusion.
Yiter said the agreement is good for world agriculture because it will open a major agricultural market to international competition. But what about the impact of the agreement on Japanese farmers?
Undoubtedly, the liberalization of beef and citrus will affect, to a certain extent, our economy, including those farmers involved in the production of beef and citrus. However, on the other part, we are sure that the efforts in Japan to rationalize our beef and citrus industries will permit those industries to survive within the framework of healthy national economy.
Yiter talked about the strength of the U.S. and how it will fare against other countries who compete with Japanese products.
We're prepared to let the marketplace work. I have a lot of confidence in both American beef producers and American citrus producers, so I believe we'll do all right in the marketplace. But let's let the future determine that. We have said all along in our negotiations with the government of Japan over a period of many years that we're not asking for any special deals for the United States. All we were asking was for a chance to enter the market and compete with anybody in the world. That's really what this agreement provides, and we'll take our chances on the competition no matter where it may arise.
In Washington, I'm Deborah Jennifer reporting for the U.S. Department of Agriculture. Adopt a Farm Family is a unique organization which encourages the parent to provide the resource, talent, and skill to support the basic needs of their adopted farm family. With us today to talk about this organization and how it works is its chairman, Mary Myers. Mary, first of all, give us a little history about this organization and how it began.
Sure. It began in Texas at the American Soybean Expo, and a group of farmers decided just to get together under Christian fellowship. They are called the Fellowship of Christian Farmers International. And then in '86, because of the drought crisis, the Adopt a Farm Family program was really instigated and began to be developed. And since then, there has not really been a need for it, so we have just kind of taken up from where this left off.
Now, what are some of the primary goals of Adopt a Farm Family?
The main vision that we have on the board right now is to revitalize rural America.
How do you go about doing something like that?
Well, to revitalize, first of all, you have to help those who are involved in rural America, and that's the farmer himself.
Mary, how do you go about matching a parent with a family?
We have application blanks for both those who want to help and those who are in need, requiring references because we have gotten ourselves involved in a few things where there were people who thought they needed something and really didn't and weren't really bona fide people who wanted to help or bona fide farmers who needed help.
Speaking of those farmers who need help, how do you determine who those farmers are? How do you seek them out?
Right now, this type of thing, publicity, and we have brochures, and just letting different organizations and just getting the word out that we're there.
What type of adoptions do you have?
For instance, one of our men that are on the board of directors right now is a lawyer, and he is furnishing free legal service to any farm family in crisis.
Any others?
Well, we have a man in Hagerstown, Maryland, that had $100,000 and from retirement, and he wanted to just give it to a farmer to help him to get through the crisis situation, and so he has given this farmer $100,000 for 5 years at interest-free to be returned when the farmer gets back on his feet.
Mary, what has been the success rate with a program of this type so far?
We really don't know because we are just beginning. I really don't know, except I know those of us who are involved in it are very excited. We're just at the grassroots, just at the very beginning, and I appreciate this opportunity to speak with you.
Do you see this program as something that will be pretty much ongoing, or will it vary depending upon a crisis that's involved?
No, in fact, that's what we're doing right now, and that's the question I'm usually asked. We want not to have it a crisis, really, but that's the way we were getting the public to understand. The hotline right now that's at USDA is something that's crisis, but we want a resource center to be an ongoing thing, to revitalize rural America, to continue to have it grow.
Mary, how can those interested get more information about Adopt a Farm Family?
They could call the USDA because they're familiar with what I am doing, or they could call our first resource center, which is in Burke County, Post Office Box 27, Girard, Georgia, 30426. And the area code is 912-569-4814.
Thank you very much, Chairman of Adopt a Farm Family, Mary Myers. In Washington, I'm Deboya Jonifer reporting for the U.S. Department of Agriculture.
Domestic cigarette consumption is declining, but tobacco use is increasing. largely because of big gains in cigarette exports. We'll examine the situation and outlook for tobacco in our discussion with Werner Grice, an economist with the U.S. Department of Agriculture's Economic Research Service. Werner, is this increased use expected to lower tobacco stocks as we go into a new marketing year?
Right. Use is up about 3%. That, combined with production that's been held below use the last couple of years, is bringing stocks down. Stocks will be down about 13% as we go into the new marketing year.
How does acreage and production figures compare to last year?
Based on the Planning Intentions report, acreage will be up about 7% this year compared to last year. With normal yields, that would boost production 10 to 15%. However, with dry weather in some parts of the growing region, yields may not be normal or above. They could be reduced compared to last year.
Now, domestic cigarette consumption is declining. Does that mean that we're manufacturing fewer cigarettes?
No, in fact, we're manufacturing more. Cigarette production was up about 5% in 1987 and expected to be up again in 1988, primarily because, or solely because of the increase in exports to particularly Far Eastern countries such as Japan and Taiwan, and beginning in the middle of this year, South Korea.
Now, those are manufactured exports. What's the outlook for leaf exports?
We anticipate that leaf exports will be up in 1988. U.S. prices have been lower the last few years. That, together with increased trade with some developing countries and the high demand for blended type cigarettes that use high quality U.S. grown tobacco, should boost exports in 1988. But this depends on the quality of the 1988 flue-cured crop.
What's expected in tobacco imports?
Imports have been increasing in recent years, particularly the imports of burley and flue-cured tobacco. However, during the early part of this year, imports are down, and stocks of imported tobacco have declined quite a bit as well.
What's the outlook for flue-cured disappearance?
Flue-cured disappearance in the marketing year that just ended, June 30th this year, we anticipate was up about 2%, primarily because of an increase in domestic use.
Now, what's expected in burley use in stocks?
Burley use we also anticipate will have increased for the 1987-88 marketing year, and this should bring stocks down about 12 or 13% from a year ago.
And in fire-cured?
Fire-cured supplies are also declining. Quotas have been held down, so supply and demand are becoming in better balance with fire-cured, just like they are with burley and flue-cured.
So what's the outlook for tobacco producers this year?
With good weather conditions here on out and increased yields, prices should be up, incomes should be up, so things would look better than a year ago.
Werner Grice and the tobacco situation and outlook. In Washington, Vic Powell reporting for the U.S. Department of Agriculture.
Dry weather has dramatically changed the spectrum of insects that are causing damage this year. Insects are also compounding the effect of the drought and forcing farmers to make difficult decisions. University of Illinois reporter Gary Beaumont has this story.
Puffed and Dry weather affects different crop insects differently. Some thrive in dry weathers and others do not. Dry weather also makes the symptoms of insect damage seem worse. And University of Illinois entomologist Kevin Steffi says dry weather affects how well insecticides work too.
The soil insecticides, just like the herbicides, require soil moisture for activation, and we haven't had any appreciable rain since planting time in early May. We've had a couple of rainfalls that may have activated some of the products a little bit, but we're a little concerned at this point as to whether or not our control is going to be as good as it should be.
Corn is already under moisture stress, and when corn rootworms feed on the roots, that adds to the stress of the corn, sometimes enough to even kill the plant.
We've got some places in the state that may have so much rootworm pressure that plants are going to show obvious signs of wilting because of the lack of moisture and on top of that a lack of roots. And in the case here we may even have some plants dying because of the double pressure.
Another insect that thrives in hot, dry weather is the spider mite. One reason that they thrive in this weather is because the plants are actually drought stressed.
The main reason is that a moisture-stressed plant has a lot more nutritious diet for the spider mites. It's more concentrated, so much of what the spider mites ingest is good for their survival rather than a lot of water, which would be the case under plants that are not stressed. So spider mites are actually directly, positively influenced by the hot, dry weather, and as I said, if this continues, they'll continue to get worse.
One insect that does not fare well in hot, dry weather is the European corn borer. Steffi says while moth numbers were relatively high in the spring, larvae seem to have died off.
Moths require dew or some form of moisture to survive, and we've seen our moth survival drop way off. We were set up for a real bad population. As it turns out, that has not been realized. We are not finding any corn borer damage to speak of in most areas of the state. And we think it's just this long spell of hot, dry weather that has not only killed the moths, but even some of the eggs and larvae that may have hatched.
If hot, dry weather continues, grasshoppers will begin to cause problems, and egg hatch has already begun in non-crop areas. Steffi says the decision to spray for insects or not will be more difficult this year.
We really can't say. It all depends on when and if we're going to get rain. We are suggesting treatments in some cases because despite this hot, dry weather, a lot of the corn looks relatively good. For things like spider mites, where spot treating can be accomplished, as well as grasshoppers, I think that would certainly pay to treat because of the small area that's treated and the low amount of money that it would cost to treat.
Steffi says each field will require an individual decision, and your local county cooperative extension service advisor can help with these decisions.
Gary Beaumont with the University of Illinois Cooperative Extension Service. I'm Deboria Jennifer reporting for the U.S. Department of Agriculture in Washington. Some Corn Belt farmers have stopped talking about drought in tentative terms. Most farmers feel it's no longer a potential. It is a severe drought, and it will have a profound economic effect on farmers. Here's University of Illinois reporter Gary Beaumont with this story.
Farmers will remember it as the drought of 1988. Yields could still go lower, but 40% of the crop in the Corn Belt is already lost. And that's whether rains come or not. And each day that corn and soybean prices go higher is a small consolation to many farmers.
No consolation at all. They could be $5, and I don't think they'd help a farmer a bit.
One farmer told me that after purchasing crop insurance for the past 5 years, he chose not to insure his crops this year. And farmers across the Corn Belt chose to insure just 6 to 8% of all the crop acreage. And farmers with a high debt-to-asset ratio could, again this year, face bankruptcy.
Those particular farms will be pretty adversely affected by even a 30% yield loss, and at a 60 or 80% yield loss in 1988, they would need to borrow tremendous amounts of money to the point where it's questionable whether a lender will continue to finance those operations.
The federal government will likely save $6 billion because now that corn prices have gone up, they won't have to make deficiency payments. But they may have to turn around and give this money back to farmers who are facing this drought disaster.
10 to 20% of the farmers are still operating with debt-to-asset ratios of 50% or higher. They have made some very good progress in the last 2 years because of supported prices and very high yields in 86 and 87. But we still do have a number of farms, 10 to 20%, for example, who are very vulnerable.
Even farmers who are solid financially are threatened. Some fields already show signs of producing no yield, and if the drought continues, all farmers are threatened.
The effect on a 600-acre grain farm is a loss of over $100,000 in 1988. They can survive that loss, but they have to borrow very extensively, not only in 1989, but beyond to maintain that operation. If you start in a relatively weak financial position, which we defined as a debt-to-asset ratio over 50%, the viability of that farm is really highly questionable if they get a zero yield and if there is no crop insurance or assistance from the federal government.
At the beginning of the 1988 growing season, farmers seemed optimistic. They were beginning down the long road to recovery. Now the weather seems to have dashed these hopes, and depending on how bad yields are, it could mean several more years of financial problems on the farm.
Gary Beaumont with the University of Illinois Cooperative Extension Service. In Washington, I'm Deborah Janifer reporting for the U.S. Department of Agriculture.